everybody. Thank you so much for joining Ben Gohlke today. He's going to be talking about resumes and portfolio reviews. And it's going to be some really exciting stuff. So what is this event that you're joining today? This is Underdog Devs Spring into Swift. If you've never heard of Underdog Devs before, you're totally missing out. Underdog Devs was created by Rick Wolter to support the formerly incarcerated and disadvantaged people coming out of prison and transitioning into the software industry. They currently rely on 100% volunteer power. It doesn't matter if you're junior or senior, they're always looking for mentors to provide advice to newcomers, incomers, and also juniors can help improve their skills by teaching. There's more plans to help people coming down the line, so really looking forward to that. And on that note, I will pass it over to Ben.
So this is Modern Tech Resumes, getting noticed before your time is up. And really kind of the core of this when you're building a resume, or really if you're building a portfolio website or any kind of sort of materials to help explain who you are and what you do for a living so that you can try and convince others to hire you, is to know your audience. How are you going to write something, right? If you're going to write an essay or a book or anything, typically one of the very first things that you do when you do such a thing is you determine who it is you're writing to, right? Because that helps decide how you're going to structure it, how your voice is going to be, who you're going to be addressing. If it's something that's addressing the audience directly, you need to know who your audience is in order to effectively market to them or make them have a reaction to what you're writing. If you're just trying to provoke a reaction or kind of whatever your goal is, it's really important to know your audience. So with resumes and portfolios and stuff that markets you for a job, what's the most important thing to know? Well, you need to know who it is that you're trying to market to, right? Because that gives you an idea of how you should do it. So is it recruiters? Is it hiring managers? Is it friends and acquaintances who might work at a particular company and maybe they're going to try and get you in? They're going to try and sort of help get you in front of the right people. So maybe they're the first point of contact that you send your resume to them. And then, maybe they just forward it on directly. Maybe they look at it first, right? So it just depends on what your relationship is with that person and how well you know them. And if you know them at all. And what it is that they're going to do for you in this process. So if they're a friend or acquaintance trying to sort of get you in front of the right people, they're probably just doing you a favor. If it's a recruiter, then they have their own interests involved with getting you hired, right? Because for them, you represent money to them, right? You represent a commission that they can get from placing you at a company. So their sort of needs around what it is that your resume contains and whether or not they might want to work with you are probably a little bit different from a friend and acquaintance. And then yet again, different from somebody like a hiring manager. So because their goals are really to fill the position with the hopefully most appropriate person, most skilled person. And their motives are going to be different necessarily from like a recruiter. So it's just very important to know when you're engaging in this hiring process, who it is that you're talking to, and how your resume will be received, right? A really interesting and important thing to remember with resumes in particular is that in theory, the average resume review time is about 6 to 10 seconds. Lots of different companies and recruiting companies and stuff have said that this is now the average. I've heard numbers, in the 60-second range, 30 seconds. So it could be, depending on the situation, more than this. But remember that it's also very possible that you could end up in front of someone. Your resume could end up in front of someone and they glance at it for a few seconds and they're just trying to scan for certain things. And if they don't see them, or they're not sort of impressed, or there's no sort of reaction that your resume might have evoked in them, then they're just going to move on. So it's very important to remember that this document that you're creating is really a document that markets you, and you need to think about the ways in which it's going to be consumed so that you can market yourself effectively. And if we're talking about a 6 to 10 second window, it's a shockingly short window to make an impression on someone and convince them to look further into you as a person and what your skills are and stuff for the job. So just kind of keep that in mind, right? Companies also now, kind of compared to sort of before many years ago, now it's become much more prevalent. The companies and recruiting companies and, like job sites that you might upload your profile to. A lot of them are going to take your resume and it's going to ingest it digitally. And then there's going to be an algorithm that's going to sort of examine the text of your resume and look for keywords. So probably I would bet at this point, more than likely, resumes are probably more often looked at by computers than they are by humans now. So you need to also keep that in mind when you're designing resumes, that how you structure it and the words that you include and sort of how you design it, it is meant for human eyes, but it's also meant for digital eyes, right? For a computer algorithm potentially to manage and to look at. So you want to kind of keep that in mind. And it's an interesting problem to kind of have to like split the difference, right? You don't want it to look too computery in the sense that it's just like a word cloud of keywords that doesn't really make any sense to a human that might read it. That would not be optimal. But you also don't necessarily want to ignore the fact that a computer might look at it and leave things out that maybe otherwise it might, sort of latch onto. And then it might then bubble your resume up in the algorithm that it's using to the human people involved to say, hey, this is a resume that might actually be relevant to the position that you're hiring for, right? So there's this interplay of making it sort of consumable by two different audiences at once. So what are the pro tips? What are the best practices? And these are mine. They're not necessarily sort of like the industry standard, but these are my tips as far as what has worked for me and what has worked for others when I've helped them. So it's just kind of the experience that I've gotten. The first thing is you want to convey the most relevant information first. So that means that if you are very early in your journey, perhaps your education is the thing that's most important at the top of your resume, right? Whereas if you've got a whole bunch of experience, your education may not be as relevant now as it was because the experience that you've gotten professionally has kind of superseded the educational experience that you had. So in that case, it might be better to showcase your most recent job position and what you did there, rather than putting your education always at the top, right? So that's kind of sort of a sub point of this first one is you're probably going to change the structure of your resume over time as you gain experience and as you try out different jobs. And especially if you do end up maybe transitioning from one position to another, you then might want to highlight different things towards the front of your resume to try to attract positions that you are currently in the market for compared to perhaps what you did before. So convey the most relevant information first. That's really important because that goes back to that 6 to 10 seconds, right? You don't have very much time to help the people who are reading it decide whether or not they want to continue reading it. So you want to put the most relevant information first so that hopefully that catches their attention. Number 2, tailor your resume layout to the job, to the company, to the sector of the industry that you're trying to get into. So if you, particularly for job switchers, right, a lot of the Underdog Devs audience is probably coming into a situation in tech where they maybe didn't used to work in tech and now they're trying to. So the experience they do have isn't necessarily directly relevant to the job you're trying to get, but you can still sort of highlight it and set it up in a different way to make it look interesting and make yourself look compelling. But you may want to even have variants of your resume that's all the same information, but perhaps it's laid out a little differently depending on what company you're going to go after, what kind of position you're going to go after, the sector within the within the market. For example, I've been both an iOS developer and also an instructor, a teacher of iOS development. And then kind of more recently, I've gotten into engineering management. So depending on if I was going after a job in the future that was maybe a teaching job or a pure development job or a management job, I might take the data that I have about myself and just lay it out a little bit differently depending on which job I was going after to highlight those most relevant skills, right? So that kind of goes back to point number 1, right? So you may end up with multiple different versions of your resume that target different things. Number 3, use custom color, layout, styling to stand out from templates. So if you go into Word or you go into really any kind of desktop publishing program or even the whole multitude of online sites that now exist for this kind of thing, you're going to find a whole bunch of templates. And it could be that you find one that you like that does look a little bit maybe off the beaten path and it works fine. That's great. But you might also consider designing a resume style that is unique to you, because then not only are you conveying your skills through what you've written down, but also you're conveying your sense of style and maybe your attention to detail and stuff like that through the way in which your resume is built and the way that it looks. That's just for the humans, right? The computers aren't going to care about that part of it. But if we're trying to attract attention from the real people that are involved in hiring, having a, you don't want to be super, super flashy necessarily, or kind of you can kind of end up in this sort of gaudy territory where it's maybe a little too much. I would say a little bit of this goes a long way, but you'll see in the examples I'm going to show you ways in which I've tried to make these resumes I'm going to show you more interesting to look at. And again, all you're trying to do is get the attention of someone and hold it for long enough so that they will actually look at you further, and make it so that, maybe you'll get an email or you'll get a phone call or you'll get more engagement from them than just 10 seconds of looking and they move on to the next one. Point number 4, tell your story in your own way. You may have already encountered this if you've worked with recruiters and stuff before, and I don't mean to bag on recruiters, but they tend to get a bad rap in the tech industry anyway. And in some cases, it's very well deserved because they often, again, they have their own agenda. They're not necessarily out to serve your interests all the time. In fact, they usually probably are not. So you need to remember that. And that includes things like they might want you to change your resume. I've had examples in my past where recruiters have asked to have me change wording in my resume to potentially leave certain experience off my resume, stuff like that. And while that is advice that you are free to take or leave, in my opinion, I would say there's nobody on the planet that knows you and your experience and your strengths better than you. So while advice from others, including me, is useful, at the end of the day, this is the most important marketing you're ever going to build, which is the marketing about yourself. So tell your story in your own way and don't let people, recruiters or anyone, overly influence or bully you into changing the way in which you market yourself. That's up to you. And obviously there's ways to do it that are both effective and not effective. So if you have a strong opinion about something and you try it and you find through sort of research and experience that maybe this way of telling your story isn't working, I'm not saying you shouldn't change it, but what I am saying is you're in charge, right? You're the one that's telling your story. So make sure that you are doing that and make sure that you're happy with the story that you're telling, because it's the story of you. So professionally anyway. So that's my 4th point. Last one is, this is marketing. Sell yourself, but don't lie. So when you are building this resume, this document, right? It is not I would say that it's an important distinction to say that your resume is not a legal document. It's not a document designed to sort of an exhaustive degree explain exactly the things that you did in the most possible truthful way that you can, that you're attesting, in court or anything. It's not a deposition. You're not trying to explain the truth as it was, right? It's not a historical record. It is a marketing document. You are marketing your skills to convince them to hire you, to engage those skills for money, right? That's the whole point of resume. So what I'm saying here, I think it could be easily misconstrued as I'm asking you to lie, and I'm definitely not asking you to lie. You should not lie in your resume. You should not explain things or say that you have skills or that you went to a certain educational and school or something that you didn't go to, or anything that that is just an out and out lie. Because for one thing, it's possible to figure those things out, and then your reputation is damaged because of that. So that's not good. You're not going to get ahead that way. And also, it's not necessary. You don't need to do that. You can have the skills you have, and you can market them in a way that is effective without having to resort to that kind of thing. So it's what I'm saying is kind of in between. I'm not saying to lie, but I'm also not saying that it has to be this just sort of dry historical record of the things that you've done. I think some people this happened to me. You get in this scenario where you think, well, a resume has to just be like the cold hard facts, right? Of exactly what I did at certain places in very plain, kind of boring, historical record type language. And the problem with doing it that way is it is not interesting to read, because it's just a plain, boring historical record retelling of stuff that you worked on. That is not compelling. necessarily, unless maybe you worked, for SpaceX and you helped them launch a rocket or something. And even then, if the person is interested in that, they're not going to care either. So it's not about that. It's about taking those cold, hard facts of things that you worked on and using language so that you can present yourself in the most interesting and compelling and positive light, short of making things up, right? Short of going too far and actually saying things that are untruthful. That would be bad. But you certainly can say things in ways that help present your skills in the best light. So that is the extent of the slides. Hopefully that was nice and short. So now what I'm going to do is just kind of show a couple of examples of some resumes. And I'm going to use, my dad has kindly allowed me to borrow his resume and show it to you all. So we're going to see two versions of it. This is the old version. And this version was actually, my dad's 62. So he's been a computer programmer and database administrator for over 30 years. He's got tons of experience. This resume was written in like either 98, 99, 2000, somewhere around there, about 20-ish years ago. This is his old resume. And until recently, he didn't need a resume because he worked at a company for a very, very long time. And just, he had never updated it. So this is what his resume looked like when he brought it to me in 2019, when he needed to start looking for a new job. And just to kind of give you an example, I do not at all mean to denigrate his efforts then, but I want to showcase a couple of things about this that really show sort of why this was good at the time and maybe why it's less useful now. So this was a Word document. He did it all in Microsoft Word. And as you can see, it is, for one thing, this is probably, I don't know, half of his total experience so far in his professional career. At this point, he had about half of what he has now. And it's still a lot. There's still a lot here. He had several jobs. He worked on lots of different kinds of things. He started out as a COBOL programmer in the late 80s. He ended up learning Java and a whole bunch of other stuff and then getting that experience. So he's really kind of, run the gamut of all different kinds of things. He taught at Valencia Community College here in Florida for a little while, teaching C. So he even, in addition to being a developer, he also even had some professional college level teaching experience, which is kind of cool. But as you can see, it's a lot of text, right? If you were to try and give this to someone today, they're going to be very quickly overwhelmed by all of the text. And then in addition to there being a lot of text, it's very dense. There's lots of stuff going on. It's not totally clear where the experience is. I mean, he's got qualifications, which is just sort of like an explanation of the different kinds of things that he's capable of doing or that he was capable of doing at this point. And then he has the list of experience with companies, in reverse chronological order, as is usually the case. Again, your most recent job is typically at the top. But again, you kind of scroll through and you're just like, if I were to receive this as a resume, I'd be like, oh man, this is a lot to take in. For some reason, when I've been in a hiring situation and I am reviewing resumes, I like to go back to front. I don't exactly know why, but I actually kind of like to see where people start. So I typically jump all the way to the bottom and see how far back it goes, for one. And then also I look at like the first job or two, and then I kind of peruse through the middle. And then I kind of jump towards the top and see like where they start and then kind of where are they now. That's just my personal style when I'm reviewing resumes. But, and I also typically give usually about 1 minute to 2 minutes to look at something. So it's longer than the average, but there's just a lot here. It's a lot to take in. It's a little bit difficult. And you'll notice, we're not going to go through it, but you'll notice if we go all the way back to his first job that he got out of college at Cincinnati Bell, he actually lists out the different positions he held within that company because he worked there for 8 years. And he was pretty granular with that description, right? So like there's a lot of, you can see all the stuff that he did and how he kind of progressed. And you'll see when we look at the new version, that is collapsed. So that's kind of my first piece of advice on looking at this one compared to the one we're going to see in a minute. That is from, I believe we did it at the end of 2019 is when we updated it. So it has like another, 20 years of experience on it, and a few more jobs. And so therefore, some of this stuff kind of has to sort of collapse because, quite frankly, his experience in 1986 when he first got out of college and was using IBM mainframes to write COBOL, that's not that relevant anymore. So why give that a bunch of space on your resume to explain when, quite frankly, no one really cares? Certainly no one cares who's maybe hiring him now with 30 years of experience. They want his sort of more recent experience probably for what they're doing. They don't probably need him for COBOL. So that's kind of my first piece of advice is as you advance in your career and as you add more things, you do want to kind of constantly look at your resume and see where you might be able to sort of scrunch down some of the oldest stuff, and maybe just omit some details, right? Like I don't need it to be that sort of in depth anymore because it is just not as relevant today as it used to be. So just to kind of quickly overview this resume, this one was designed for print. This is the late 90s when he wrote this. And so he's told me that when he was using this resume in the late 90s to get jobs, he was mostly printing it, or maybe emailing it to a recruiter who was then printing it. But essentially it was designed for print and people were physically reading it from a piece of paper, right? So that's the modality in which it was being consumed was different than it is today. This resume was written for maximum detail, right? Like you can see, he really went all in and talked all about the in a very granular way, all the stuff that he's done. So it was designed for maximum details. And also, again, we don't have to read it, but I kind of went through it a little bit. He tried to explain in his language that he used, he tried to explain to a human reader the relevant technical details of the things that he did. So it's prose, right? It's very human friendly, I would say, right? It's designed for a real person to read because at the point that this was being used, there weren't any computer programs probably that were ingesting this thing and then looking for keywords and doing machine learning and all that kind of stuff that didn't exist. So it was meant entirely for a human audience and probably an audience that was reading it on a physical piece of paper. So again, we're just thinking about the audience and how it's going to be used. And I think in that case, it's not bad. It certainly could be, I think it could be, made a little better even at the time, but in general, I feel like it probably did. I mean, it clearly did what he needed because he did get jobs off of it. So if we look at the new one, you can see how it's changed. This one, there's more design, right? So I built this for him in Sketch, which is a vector drawing program. And it's because that's the one that I know how to use well. So that's the one I used. There are very likely better ones for this kind of work, but Sketch is what I know. So that's what I did. And so this is designed this is very different. For one thing, there's a lot more experience on here. So it actually becomes kind of a problem when you have, I know it's a good problem to have, but it can become a problem when you have that much experience because how do you boil it down so that you, point one, right, get the most relevant information in front of the people as quickly as you can, because as we've gone from 1998 to today, the time that resumes are being reviewed gets smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller to the point that now we're at, a matter of seconds. So we need to really we need to give people a really decent sort of look at who is Joe Gohlke, right? What is his deal? What are his most relevant and useful skills? And do those relate to the things that we're looking for, right? We want to know that very quickly. So one of the differences between the one that we looked at a minute ago and this one is designed for digital distribution. So it's got more color, right? We don't need to worry about printing it on a black and white printer. It's probably going to be sent as a PDF, probably opened as a PDF, looked at on a computer, probably never printed, right? It's a very different way of consuming it. So we can then play into that and use color and other things to do it. So it's like a very, very dark blue. It comes off as basically black in this version, but it's a very, very dark blue header with like gold sort of accents, and then like a nice strong font. So in this one, we broke it up into basically two sections. The first section is this first page, and this is a quick look at who my dad is, right, as a professional. So he wrote this professional profile, this little sort of blurb about himself. And I told him, try to boil down your experience over the last 30 years into like one paragraph and specifically make sure that you mention the things that you want to highlight, right? Like if they're going to bother to read this, then you want to make sure you're getting your money's worth, right? But from the recruiter or the hiring manager. So highlight the things in this little blurb that you think they'd want to know and that you want to promote in yourself, right? You want to sort of the job that you're trying to get, maybe try and, highlight those things in there. We then have some other skills and stuff. And so like this, right? This section is actually, while it is human readable and somebody could glance through it and kind of get an idea of his most recent sort of collection of skills. This is also designed so that if a computer were to ingest this, hopefully it'll grab onto this skills section and it will bring in all of these terms, and then it will hopefully trigger some keywords, right? So it's nice to look at and a human can read it and it's fine. It's not weird or jarring looking, but it is also designed so that a computer could ingest it and look at it as well. And then here we want to give them sort of a sense of how much experience he has. And kind of the easiest way to do that is just to show, like, here's all the stuff that he's done, right? And so we put title, and then company, and then time served, right? How long he spent at that position at that company. So we kind of just left it at that. There's no details. There's no information. It's just title, company, and the amount of time that he spent at that company in that position. And that is, again, we're trying to get to glanceable data. So we're trying to get to the point where the person can just, go down, look at it and say, oh, he's been a database administrator. And then before that, he was, a consultant, and then he was a software lead, and then he was a account manager at Oracle, and he was a dev, and, whatever. So you can sort of, go backwards or forwards. You can look at it from either direction and get a sense of his progression as a professional. And maybe most importantly at the top, the couple things he's done recently to really showcase kind of his current skill set. So in theory, somebody could look at this first page, get a sense of his situation, and then make a decision based on just that. They may not even need to go any further. And in fact, they probably won't. So this first page is really designed to capture eyeballs, right? To hopefully engage them and to make them sufficiently interested to get them to contact him. And then pages 2, 3, and 4 are really just additional details, right? So on page 2, we jump into the details about the position. So if you do want to, if this person is curious, we want to give them more if they want to engage, right? So the first page is hopefully get these people interested and hooked on learning more. And then rather than making them contact you, right, to learn more, you're like, just go to page 2. It's all you got to do to learn more about me, right? If you want. If you don't want to, you don't even need to. But if you want to, the data is there. So we jump into pages 2, 3, and 4. And basically that's just a listing of all of the sort of relevant details about each job. And if you look at and kind of compare the verbiage that you see in the little blurbs underneath the positions compared to the one from 20 years ago, the blurbs are smaller on the older positions, and there's just less detail. And it's because he decided people don't really care about my position in 1986 at CBIS, right? It's not as relevant to my current skills. And I just give you a little taste of what I did in case you're curious, but probably no one will read that. And it's there for just sort of to provide completeness on my experience, but I don't need to be nearly as detailed because I'm not relying on that information. So that's another thing, right? If you're very early in your journey, you really want to highlight the most important things. And if you don't have a lot of experience, then one of the ways that you can sort of make up for that is just being a little more detailed about the things that you did do at maybe the one job or the one internship that you've so far completed, right? You can be more in depth about it to really give them a sense of, yeah, I'm young or I'm inexperienced or whatever it might be, but I do have experience at X, Y, and Z. And here, let me tell you about it, right? Whereas as you kind of progress, you end up sort of in the other end of the spectrum, like my dad is, where now you're kind of have too much information and you want to sort of boil it down, right? So that's what he's done with this. And then you'll notice too, that I chose to put his education and his military service on page 2, because for one thing, we didn't really have room on page 1. And to go back to rule number 1, right? It isn't as relevant, right? He has a computer science degree from the UCF. It's useful, but it's from 1986. So it's almost as I was born in 84. It's almost as old as I am, right? Like, and it's just not, it's not nearly as relevant to his current skill set. And no one's going to hire him or not hire him at this point in his career based on that. They're going to hire him entirely based on the experience. So it is useful, but not necessarily the most relevant. So it gets demoted to page 2, right? For some of you, if you're starting out, you went to Lambda school or another boot camp or, whatever the education might be, you went to university. Maybe that is super important. I just graduated with a CS degree, or I just finished a boot camp or something. you want to put that at the very top, because for you, it is the most relevant thing, or one of the most relevant things that you can explain to someone to hopefully try and get you a job. But for him, less so, right? Same thing with this tools thing, right? It's designed to just sort of showcase some tools that he's good at using, human readable, but also very sort of word cloud friendly for if a computer were to ingest this thing, it could hopefully pick up on those strings and then use them as keywords. So trying to sort of strike a balance of making it something that's friendly for real people to read, but also kind of friendly for a computer to read as well. So that's his change. And so just to really go, it's gonna be real quick, but I just kind of wanted to show you another example. This is my resume. And it's current. It is 5 pages long, and I followed essentially the same idea. You can see it looks very different, right? The styling is different. It's because I wanted to express myself with this, right? Whereas I was trying to sort of make his fit his personal aesthetic. So I wanted mine to just look differently. So you can see it's also designed in Sketch. Again, it's because it's the tool that I know. And it's similar in that on the first page, I've got the most important stuff, my experience summary. It's got all the jobs that I've done so far. And then I wanted to have a skills section, and I wanted to sort of, rather than just have it be like a word cloud, I wanted it to be like a little sort of paragraph of information. So to highlight, in my case, right, 18 years experience in the tech industry, 12 as a software engineer, and 10 as an iOS engineer. I've been in 5 different positions where I've managed teams, worked with junior developers, mentoring them, teaching them, right, taught at boot camps and built curriculum, yada, yada. So I wanted to sort of be a little bit more, instead of being just maybe phrases, right, I wanted to sort of explain myself a little bit in a summary. And so I chose to do it that way. But that's just my sort of decision. You're, of course, free to sort of decide to do it however you want. Let me turn on Do Not Disturb real quick. Okay. So again, this is an example of trying to showcase your own personal style, right? And help you to express yourself and give people a sense of who you are as a person. So then it's very similar to his in that on pages 2, 3, and 4, we just jump through the sort of a summary of the different positions that I've held and sort of the relevant information about them. So earlier on, it's like a bunch of stuff that I did with iOS apps. And then there's some teaching there, and then some more development and some more teaching. And then now I run an engineering team. So my approach, if you were to read these, my approach, for example, up here, I can't highlight, for like my current job as director of mobile engineering at Rekor, that paragraph is designed to explain sort of, while I still code and I'm still an engineer and I will always be an engineer, I'm sort of highlighting my managerial and leadership skills, because if I were to need to get a new job or want to get a new job, I probably would want to continue in a role similar to what I have. So I want to sort of tweak, right, a little bit, like, yeah, I can code and I can build iOS apps, no problem. If that's what you need, I can definitely do that for you. But I also have been cultivating my managerial skills and my engineering management skills, and I would be, I'd be excited to engage in that with a future company as well. So I'm sort of tweaking my approach a little bit to showcase the most relevant things, right, for a role like that. So if I were going after a role that was managerial in nature, I would potentially maybe even sort of tweak some of this wording a little more. Like, for example, at Lambda School, I was a program manager in addition to being an instructor. So I would maybe, play that up a little bit more to explain my leadership skills specifically. Whereas if I was going after a job that was pure dev, then I might even sort of downplay that just slightly and try and ramp up a little bit my engineering skills, because I want to make sure that the person looking at it realizes I have the skills you need for the job, right? And that's what's most important. I'm not lying. I'm just sort of changing the story a little bit to just sort of emphasize or de-emphasize certain things to, again, get the attention of people and hopefully get them interested. And then for me, on the last page, I've got my school, and then also kind of the organizations that I've been involved with, like Underdog Devs, for example. So it's really good to highlight those kinds of things. If you are, if you're a mentor, or if you're even, just involved and maybe you've given a talk or something, or if you attend a meetup or whatever, it's important to showcase those other kinds of things that you're engaged with, so that you can you show, for one, in this case, both these things are relevant to my career. One is as a member and the organizer of the local meetup in Orlando for iOS, and also being involved with Underdog Devs. It showcases, in this case, mentorship and being interested in learning more about tech and helping others learn about tech, and those kinds of more like soft skills are useful to showcase, even if the job that you're going after isn't necessarily all about that. It's still useful to show. So if you have things like that in your life that you want to showcase, please do that. Please put it on your resume, show that off. Again, this is your document. It's a marketing tool for yourself. And you get to decide what it looks like and how it works. So one more point I want to make. In my case, I have two versions of this. This is what I consider my CV, which is like my full, like everything, all the stuff is in here. And then I also have a version of it that I just call my resume, that is the exact same document. It's just only page one. So I only include just that summary and then kind of my skills and my contact information. And that's basically it. And then what I do is, depending on who I'm engaging with to send my resume to, I might send one versus the other. And my general rule of thumb is I send this one first. And then if they want to learn, if it hooks them and they want to learn more, I send them the big one. But I don't really want to necessarily overload them with the big one from the get-go, because it might just be too much. So I design my resume so that the first page can stand on its own. And then if I want to kind of convey the full one, I can do that. And with my dad's, if we look at his, so this is his full CV. This is the one we looked at. It's got everything. When I made him a one-pager, I decided to actually tweak slightly his one-pager. So you'll notice it looks very similar to the first page of the other one. The one difference is I kind of tweaked the layout a little bit, and it's so that I could fit his military service and his education onto page one, and also his sort of word cloud of tools to be more of a complete, one page look at him. And that is in particular, like the military service and the education, is because he has for a very long time worked with contracting companies, people like Lockheed Martin and other companies like that, who get contracts with the Department of Defense. And so having military service and having a formal degree, even if it is kind of at this point pretty old, those are little touchstones that the hiring managers that work for these companies, a lot of them are going to be ex-military, stuff like that. It might sway them slightly that, oh, he was in the Army, he worked on helicopters, I worked on helicopters, or I flew helicopters, or whatever, right? It's a little touchstone that might maybe get that person a little more interested than they otherwise would be. And so we wanted to bring that kind of stuff into his one-page resume in case he sends this to someone. We want to, again, present him in the best possible light, most relevant information. And we want to even think about the psychology of the person reading it, right? So like a bunch of these, managers who work at these companies, a lot of them, when they work on DoD stuff, they've come from the military. So having that in there, maybe it'll nudge it just a little bit, and he might get a call back, whereas otherwise, perhaps not. So those are the kinds of even little things you can think about when you're designing your resume, to make sure that you give it your best shot, right? To get it in front of someone, and hopefully what you're really hoping for is response, right? To get a response from them, to set up a phone screen or an interview or whatever, and anything you can do to rise yourself above the rest, right, is important. And that means, because it's yours and you have full control, it means everything can affect that: the color, the layout, the way in which you present your information, the language you use, what things you include or not include, right? They're all up for your experimentation. And that's kind of my last piece of advice, is I would encourage you to experiment with your resume. Don't make it a static document that you write once and all you ever do to it is just add things to it as you go. Tweak it. My resume, the one you just saw, is probably, I don't know, the 6th or 7th major design that I've had over the last 12 years of doing software development professionally. And that's because, for one, I just kind of get bored of it and I want to try something different, but also I want to keep it fresh, and I want to keep the ideas on there fresh, and I want to stay relevant with the ways in which people are consuming these things, and make sure that, again, it doesn't just sort of end up being a static document that just kind of becomes old and sad and neglected. I want to keep it fresh, because it is in many cases, it's the very first thing that people are going to learn about me in a professional context. And I want to make sure that I'm just presenting my best self in that way.
Absolutely. That's some really great advice. And really great revamps as well. It's amazing.
Thanks.
We do have a few questions that have rolled in. Again, if you have any questions, I did stick the link in the chat, so feel free to add them there. First question comes from Aaron. How would you add a previous career in a separate tech field into your resume? Would that be irrelevant?
Yeah, so that's a really good question, and I think that does, particularly for people who are kind of, maybe coming from the boot camp world where you've reskilled and you're trying to get into tech. It's very possible that your previous career had nothing to do with tech, maybe, and so how do you you don't want to just leave it off necessarily, but you also don't want it to become a distraction. And so what I would say is kind of going back to the points that I made at the beginning, right? Most relevant information first. So let's just take an example where maybe you are a boot camp grad. So I would put that first, right? You went to Lambda school, you went to, wherever, Flatiron, whatever it might've been, or you have, you got an NAS degree from a community college or a computer science degree or whatever that educational experience is. Put that front and center, very top, and explain, if nothing else, make sure that you highlight some interesting things that you either learned or worked on during that period. So like, for example, if you went to a boot camp, you could put maybe your final project details, right? Because that's typically going to be probably the biggest thing you worked on while you were there, and sort of the one that was the most complete and had the most challenges. So I would do things like put that there, and then put ideally links to GitHub and stuff like that are even clickable, so that people can go out and take a look at it. The advantage to being in a pretty much all digital world now is that you can design this. Even if it's a PDF you're going to share, you can design it so that it's interactive and people can click on it and go look at it, because they're very likely not going to print it. They're going to just go look at it digitally. You can rely on that to a degree, right? And you can let people do that. And then as far as like the previous experience, if it's from a separate field, if it's from a tech or tech related field, to me, that means it gets promoted, in the sense that maybe it wouldn't be included at all. Maybe it'd be at the very bottom. In this case, if it's a tech or tech related field, to me, it becomes medium important, because it's not as important as your most recent education, because that's going to be probably the skills that you are going to try and engage in your next job, right? But if it's a tech or tech related field, it probably would go on the first page. Again, if you're fairly new, you're probably not going to have lots of pages of stuff to write down. So it probably goes on the first page, it gets included. And then if you can do this, if you can either showcase in the description things that might even be tangentially related to what it is that you want to do that for sure. And if you don't have anything like that, then my suggestion would be to try to find things about that job that you learned while you were there that you think might carry into your new job. So if that's like soft skills, like I helped teach some people something, right? Like for example, one of my earliest jobs was in tech support. So it was a tech job, but I wasn't a programmer. I did, however, teach myself, this was the very first thing I ever programmed, teach myself how to write shell scripts to help support what we were doing in tech support. So we had to basically log into computers and sort of mess with them and fix problems and stuff. And so I learned how to write shell scripts to automate some of those functions. And it was really just a selfish interest to make my job easier. And inadvertently, what I did was I learned a skill that was useful. And then it got kind of popular. Like other techs in the group were like, yeah, I'm using your tool now whenever I log in and fix something. And like, I would love to be able to automate some of the things that I do. And so I was able to organize a little class at my work where I taught other tech support people how to shell script and how to get around in the Linux terminal more easily so that they could do their jobs more efficiently. So like that is something that I would then want to highlight as, it's training, it's leadership, it's taking initiative, it's all those really nice soft skills that are really pertinent to any job, right? So I'd make sure that I'd highlight that, even though the work that I did in that position really was not programming work. I can sort of ignore the boring parts about that position and highlight the parts that I think that would carry into the next one. And that's how you can kind of transform something that may seem at first glance to be like, well, this isn't relevant at all, right? If you can find, typically you can find at least one soft skill that you worked on that might carry over, and then, you know, make sure you highlight that in the description.
To build off that question, is there any value in highlighting the projects that you worked in? Maybe it's not in a boot camp, maybe it's a side project, and talking about that in great detail?
Yes, for sure. That's a great point. So maybe you're self-taught, or, you know, you just don't have kind of you know, a school related project or something. If you do have a side project that you've worked on, in particular, if it's something that you can even showcase publicly, right? You may or may not want that code to be public, but if it is, all the better. You can you can give links out to your GitHub so they can take a look at it, and you can explain specifically those things that you learned, right? One of the biggest things that technical hiring managers want to know is your thought process, how you solve problems, engineering problems. And that's because that's what they're actually hiring you for, right? They're not hiring you for your knowledge of Swift or any of those things, really, because anybody can learn those things, right? Those are just skills that you can acquire. And even if you don't have them at the time, you can learn them. The thing that they really, the sort of the magic factor of a great engineer, right, is somebody who can solve abstract problems. And so they want to understand how you do that. And it turns out that that's really difficult to assess in an interview, or in most of the situations where a hiring manager is trying to sort of bring in all these people and basically filter out a bunch of them that are not relevant, and then keep the people that are, and then find sort of the best, right? Like, that's very difficult to do. And that's part of the reason why I think our interviewing process in tech is so incredibly broken, because we're optimizing all the wrong things, but that's a whole nother discussion. So if you have like a side project, right? And if you have particularly like hard won lessons, even if you think they're kind of like, well, yeah, it was hard won because I didn't know what I was doing, but like, this should be super easy. And nobody can be impressed by this, right? You're not trying to impress people. In particular, if you're a junior, no, anybody who is not terrible is not going to expect you to have reinvented the wheel because you're a junior developer, you're starting out. So the problems that you find really difficult today that you solve, that you're like, yes, right? That's still valuable. And explaining how you got there is actually way more important than the thing that you discovered. So I would say that if you have side projects and stuff like that, that you want to include, definitely include them. If you can include like links to code, that's even better. And then really showcase those hard-won lessons. Again, even if at the end of the day, the lesson itself maybe isn't super impressive, explaining the journey in a compelling way, it's marketing, right? It's a marketing document to help teach them how it is that you solve problems. And that's what they want to hear.
Yes. One more question.
Sure.
Is SEO a concern for resumes, or do you have a separate resume format you use for submission to employers that store your resume in a database?
Really good question. And that is pretty common. You'll see either with company sites, or if you go to like a job board or something, often they'll be like, hey, give me your resume. And then, you know, they give you options to upload a file. And sometimes, like, for example, mine are all in PDF and they're not editable. And that's because I don't want people to edit them. It's like, this is me, this is my document, you can't edit it. But sometimes like, can I get a Word version? It's like, no, because there is no Word version. I didn't even use Word to create it. And no, you can have Word version because you can't edit it. So sometimes that's unavoidable, right? There's just not, you just can't get around that. And then other times they will oddly ask you to upload your resume, like give me your PDF or whatever it is. And then also here's 14 fields where I'm going to ask you all the same questions about you that are on your resume that I want you to duplicate all this information. I don't exactly know what the point of that is, but clearly they want sort of all the data again, right, in a form that they can understand and ingest. My first thing that I would say about that is don't use systems like that, like refuse to work with them because they're terrible, and it's probably they're gonna treat you like cattle. I mean, in particular, those often tend to be like recruiting companies and stuff, which I found, like I said, recruiters are typically not looking out for you, and that's an issue in and of itself. But if you can't, right, I don't want to say that that's good advice all the time, because maybe that's one of the few options that you have. So if that is the case where you need to sort of optimize for their system, then what you could do is you could keep a version of your resume that is basically just text. And maybe it's a text document that you don't really share with anyone. You just keep it sort of with you, and it's broken up in a nice way so that when that kind of thing is asked of you, you can just sort of copy and paste the chunks, the relevant chunks of your resume into those forms, and into, you know, whatever format they want, without having to sort of go through your nice pretty document. And, you know, maybe it's not even designed for you to be able to like easily copy and paste it. If you keep sort of a plain version, a plain text version of just the meat of it, right? It would just make it easier for you to be able to upload it and use it that way. And the other thing that you could consider doing is you could make a version of your resume that is essentially either a markdown document that will get converted. You know, you could use a markdown parser to turn it into HTML and then make it a static page on your website. The easiest way to do that would actually, if you don't know how to do that, would be to just create a GitHub repository. And then you can make a README, and the README fully accepts Markdown. So you could just take all this stuff, format it with Markdown to make it look pretty good. And then GitHub will automatically render all that as HTML for you. And then you can just use that, basically the README on the front page of a repo, as one way to sort of convey resume information. So you could just share that link, for example. Or you could, if you want to get fancy, you could, on your site, you could, you know, with HTML and CSS, you could even sort of build a version of your resume that is entirely on the web natively as a sort of a static page. And then you can share that, or, you know, whatever. And in a case like that, it would potentially be affected by SEO. So if you do it well, then, you know, that specific version of your resume could even bubble up in search results and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's some really great advice. I've certainly come across plenty of those forms.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe that's a follow-up discussion, having some interviewing horror stories or
Right.
One more question came in.
Okay.
Sorry, having slight technical difficulties with one of these. Aaron would like to know, in your experience, have you hired applicants that have freelance work? Do you consider that experience any different?
I don't know if I've personally hired anyone that has freelance experience. I probably have, but I can't think of any examples. But that would not be something that I'd be like, well, all they have is freelance experience, I'm not going to consider them, right? That's, to me, experience is experience. So whether it is experience in school, whether it is experience as side projects that you do yourself, freelance work, professional work, kind of whatever it is, that's what's kind of cool about tech, is that it's the same problem everywhere, right? This problem that you're solving is always, and I'm saying this in the broadest of senses, right? Like, you're solving the same kinds of problems everywhere, no matter what the context is. So to me, it's all relevant, because it's all about learning how to engineer solutions. And so I would consider any of it to be good. Well, and what that also means is that any of it and all of it can be useful and relevant and impressive. And any of it and all of it can be a showcase of your inability to do this, right? So while I'm not going, I personally would not bias one kind of experience over another. I would hope that what I would do, and I hope that's what I have done, is that I would evaluate the experience that you are conveying in sort of with the same lens, no matter what kind it is. And if it looks interesting and impressive, then I'm going to be interested and impressed. And if it doesn't look interesting and impressive, then I'm not going to be. Like, if you do a final project at Harvard and it's crap, I don't really care that you did it at Harvard. It's not good. Like, it doesn't showcase anything that is compelling, right? So I really think that we'd probably be in a better place as an industry if more people did it that way, because there is a lot of bias in the industry about where the experience comes from, and I think that's silly and pointless and counterproductive. But I also want to make sure that I make clear that, like, that's just my opinion. That doesn't mean that you should use that as gospel and, like, well, Ben said that that everybody should, look at experience the same, and how dare you bias it? It's, people are going to sort of do it however they want, hiring managers. So I think a way to get around that bias is essentially to sort of take one of the points that I made to heart, which is this document is a marketing document and it's all about you and your skills, and don't feel like you're sort of beholden to this. And maybe this is a notion that only I think of. I don't I don't know if this is something that you all think, but I certainly thought this way for a very long time, that your resume is like a historical legal document that is a dry retelling of the stuff that you did. And that is what it can be, but it can be just that, but it can also be way more than that. And so one way to kind of combat the bias of, oh, you're just a boot camp grad, or oh, you just did side projects, or oh, all you've done is freelance work, or whatever bias someone might bring to your experience, is to present it in a way that is compelling. And it just makes it harder for them to apply that bias, because they're like, man, it's just freelance work, but this looks really great, right? Like it makes it harder for them to say no. And that's really what you want to do. You want to make it as difficult, if not impossible, for them to say no, because that means that they're going to say yes and they're going to call you back.
Absolutely. I have one that I have come across a lot of people ask. And first off, I love that you like showcase some, design into your resumes because I think it's so fun, and it's really like a creative outlet. And you're totally right. It helps you stand out from the other pile of resumes that they have come in. So my question is, do you have any tips or like guidelines that you practice by when you're designing resumes? Because I know a lot of we've all heard of the developer UI, right?
Right.
I think a lot of developers kind of shy away from using creative elements like that. So I'm just wondering if you have any tips or guidelines to help with getting started there.
Yeah, that's a good question. So I definitely have suffered, and I'm sure I still do in some ways, the sort of the curse of being a developer and being very engineering focused, and that sometimes means that your designs are not that great. But I think in my case, I've taken up an interest in design, and I've done that in part because iOS as a discipline is one where design is probably more important to iOS than maybe any other sort of subgenre of programming. Because if you want to make iOS apps and you want people to use them, they have to be good. Like they have to look good. They have to work well. They have to be cohesive, understandable. And the UI is so important and integral to that you kind of can't really, yes, you can work in large groups, and I just work on the networking code. That is possible. But in all the places I've worked, I've been a holistic developer on the team where I work on all parts of it. And so I can't ignore things like that. So I've picked up a few things here and there. I've tried to learn about color theory and that kind of stuff a little bit. I mean, there's a lifetime of things to learn there, but I've tried to sort of pick up the basics. And then as far as advice on what to do, experimentation is great. Just try things. There's an old saying, I don't know when exactly it was coined, a very long time ago, I'm sure, but it's this idea in art where you have to be, the saying is you need to kill your darlings, meaning that you have to be willing to spend a bunch of time on something and then go, this is crap, I'm throwing it away, and then starting over on something new because it just isn't working for what you need. And that's true, I think, with design. That's kind of true with everything. You have to be willing when you're creating, whether it's creating code or creating visuals or whatever, you have to be willing to not be too beholden to it. And I think that's part of the reason why I've redesigned mine like 8 times, because I like it and I'm like, this is great, I'm all about it. And then like, a year goes by or something, I need to get a new job and I look at them, it's looking kind of tired, and I have better ideas about how to organize it. And so I engage in this. Usually it's I'll just tweak it, and then pretty soon I've like completely redone the entire thing, and I'm like, well, okay, I guess it's all new this time. So experimentation is really important. And then quite frankly, shameless sort of stealing of, I'm going to say, inspiration. Not you shouldn't just steal people's designs. That's not good. You want people to steal your code, so you shouldn't steal people's designs wholesale. But what I would say is a lot of creative sort of art is about seeing how other people have done things and then remixing it, right? Putting your own spin on it and changing it, and but being inspired by the things that other people have done. And so I often will go to places like Dribble. So it's with 3 B's, DRIBBBLE. It's basically a site for designers to show off their work. about all kinds of stuff. So it could be print design, it could be iOS screens, it could be all kinds of things. It's actually a great place to just go kind of daydream about design. And there's lots of incredibly talented designers on there. And you can go to that site, type in resume, and you can actually get people who have designed. It's a lot of people who are designers, like UI and UX designers, who have made their resume, and they just like are showing off, like, look what I made, like, look how cool this is. And so I've done things like that where I'm like, pick up a color, or like what you saw in my design of kind of like the bars. Someone had done something like that, and I was like, that's cool. I like kind of the way that it separates the different sections of the resume. And so I kind of took that idea and I incorporated it. And I think it's fine to mimic, right, in that way, because you're going to mimic a little bit and you're like, you know what, this is great. And now that I've kind of got a basic idea here, I like this, but let me tweak it to work like this, and let me tweak this over here. And then pretty soon you've done so much work to it that it has become your own thing. And then it expresses you and your sort of creative outlet. So mimicry and experimentation, I think, are really the most valuable things you can do. Because like we know with coding, right, the only way to really get good at programming is putting your butt in the seat, putting your hands on the keyboard, and getting to work on building things and throwing lots of it away and rewriting it, right? And the same thing is true with like visual design and stuff. You have to just sort of put a bunch of things on the screen and go, nope, this is terrible, and then delete all of it and start over, or like delete half of it, or move this around, or it starts to kind of gel in a way. And that's what's really exciting and fulfilling about it, is that you're like, yeah, this is working. I in fact changed my resume a little bit just before we started. I wanted to add Underdog Devs to the list, and I had to make room, basically. So I shortened some of my descriptions in the early parts of my career because it's just not as relevant anymore. And then I made some room, and then I had to actually redesign the bottom half, the last page of my resume. And I tried a couple of things and I didn't like any of them. And what I ended up deciding was I just need to have it look exactly like the rest of it, because that's what creates a cohesive document. And so I did that. And then suddenly it went from being like, this is not that great, to, yeah, this is, for me, perfect for now. And so it's experimentation is what gets you there.
Nice. Last minute changes before a presentation. Nothing like it.
I thrive under pressure, so.
Some people.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's actually a book. It's called Steal Like an Artist.
Yeah.
And I think you just hit it totally on the head. Like, take inspiration from where you find joy and what you think looks good, and you kind of create your own from inspiration coming from other people.
Yeah,
that's
for sure.
That's good advice.
Yep.
One more question just rolled in.
All right.
I am teaching myself how to code, so probably the only way of getting my first job is going to be with a nice portfolio. Any advice on how to build that?
So it would depends on what kind of work you're doing. If it's web work, then the best way to build a portfolio is to create a website, right? That showcase, because the site itself can showcase some skills if that's what you're learning. And then on the site, you then want to showcase the projects, the other things that you've worked on. And you want to have links, you want to have screenshots, you want to have descriptions, you want to have a little bit of sort of just prose that someone can just read and kind of get a sense of things. And then you probably also want to have specific, maybe a bulleted list or something of those important frameworks and technologies that you've worked with that project, to give if it's a hiring manager, or I should say maybe it's a recruiter, they're going to read some of it, and then they're also going to kind of scan for things. Especially if they're not technical, they're going to just sort of be looking for keywords. So you want to make sure you either pepper those into your prose, or you want to just have like a list somewhere. And then if it's a hiring manager, they're probably going to do the same, but they might also actually kind of want to just sort of read and hear from you directly what you've done. So that's kind of why it's important to usually include both sort of a paragraph and then also like keywords that people can kind of take a look at and go, I'm not technical, but I'm a recruiter and I know that Node.js is important to this backend role. So I'm going to make sure that I look for Node.js in people's portfolios and stuff, right? So a lot of the same kinds of rules and guidelines around the resume apply to your portfolio. The major difference is that with the resume, it's probably going to be almost entirely text, whereas with a portfolio, you do want to showcase more visuals. And if you're web, one of the ways to do that is to just make a website because it's very visual, right? If you're an iOS developer or you're doing, like mobile development, Android, iOS, or if you are a desktop application developer, which is less and less sort of popular these days, but you might be, you definitely want to do things like showcase screenshots, right? In particular, if you help design those screens, because not only, for iOS, I'm going to say, to me, when I'm hiring an iOS dev, it's just as important that they have a decent, a very firm grasp of the UI that you can create for out of the box. And then like kind of a decent sense of, how, like what looks good and what works well and what flows and that kind of thing. You don't have to be a design expert, and we very well may have a designer on staff. It's kind of do the heavy lifting. But it's important still, even if you're a dev, to have a basic sort of working knowledge of those things. So with a portfolio, one way to convey that would be through screenshots. And what's even better is a little video, right? A little video of the screen of the app in action. That if you had a 30-second video that you threw on YouTube for free, and you embedded that video in your portfolio site or wherever you're doing it, even if you don't know how to, if you're an iOS dev, you can't write websites, you can kind of take the GitHub trick where you make a repo, you set up a README, it's all Markdown. Markdown's very easy to learn. And you can design a portfolio page in your README and have it look nice. And then you can actually embed those YouTube links directly into the Markdown. And when GitHub renders the Markdown as HTML, it will actually sort of expand those YouTube links, and you'll get, a little player. And so people can just play the video right there. You have like a 30-second video of you using the app, and maybe even a little voiceover if it's not straightforward what you're doing, a little voiceover of what's going on, how the app works, and ways in which decisions that you made to help design and build this thing. That's even better, right? Because it's in your own words, it's using your own visuals and your own explanations, and it's letting you showcase what you think is most important. And it's quick and easy to consume, right? If it's a minute or less, people are probably going to I'd watch it because it really gives me a sense of what it is that you're trying to do. And then if you're iOS, if that app is in the App Store, give me a link, right? Let me download it really easily so I can play with it myself, so that I can see for myself, right, how it works. And then if that code is public, then I can also go look at the code, right? So I can see the front end, I can see the code, I can hear from you how it came together, all those kinds of things kind of all at once. That's really gonna, to me, most people that I've encountered don't do any of those things when I've tried to, when I'm hiring for iOS in particular. So if you did, that's, what is that? Probably an extra maybe hour or so of making this README document, putting together a little, you can actually, if it's iOS, if you don't know this, you're going to have a Mac, of course, because you need one for iOS development. If you open QuickTime on your Mac and you plug your phone in, you can actually sort of reverse screen share your iPhone through QuickTime onto your desktop. And then you can record a video with QuickTime, and then you can interact with the screen on your real iPhone. And you can record your voice through the mic that's built into your computer. And you can actually create a screencast video of yourself using your app. Then you can just upload that to YouTube for free. So an hour's worth of work gets you all these different ways that I can interact with your content and your portfolio. And that's going to make me much more likely to, want to talk to you, because I can really get a true sense of what it looks like, how you built it. And then I can also see, do you use spaces or tabs, and do you do all embracing or K&R bracing, or I can nitpick your code too, right? So I can really get a sense of you as a developer, and that will help me decide.
Picking fights tonight.
I had to throw that in there.
Well, we are just a bit over time, so what's the best way for people to reach you if they have follow-up questions?
Sure. So if you are an Underdog dev and you're in the Slack, I'm in the Slack. So please feel free to DM me. If you are not and you want to join, reach out to one of us and we can help you get in. And if you just want to talk to me publicly, I'm on Twitter at Ferrousguy, FEROOUSGUY.
Awesome. Well, this was a really great session. I know I learned some stuff, and I'm sure everyone else feels the same. Thank you so much, Ben, for your contribution.
Thank you.
To everyone else, make sure you follow Ben, go talk to him, ask him a bunch of questions about tabs versus spaces.
That's right.
Follow Underdog Devs on Twitter, and we hope to catch you at the next session. Have a good night, everyone.